Today we are going to talk about some abiotic factors in ecosystems. The first thing we're going to talk about here is something called biogeochemical cycles. Biogeochemical cycles. Now, before we get into that, let's break down the word again. Bio means life, geo means earth, chemical means chemicals. So life, earth, chemical cycles. What does that mean? Well, one really important idea in the world, in science, is the idea of matter. Now, we haven't talked about this yet. In your biology book and a lot of text, this comes first. I like to start not talking about chemistry first because, I don't know, we can't do anything fun with that and get outside. Matter is anything that has space, has mass, takes up space. Well, maybe you already know that from 7th grade or 6th grade or 5th grade or 8th grade science. What does that have to do with this? Well, the stuff, matter is the stuff that makes everything up. It's the stuff that makes everything up. So if matter is the stuff that makes everything up, then what you're made of is matter. And a very, very, very important idea about matter is that all of the matter that's in the universe has always been here. That's kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around. So all of the matter so where does it go? Where does the stuff that makes up you? You were created by your parents, and you grew inside of your mommy's tummy, and here you're still growing. Where is that stuff coming from? It's coming from other matter. So as you grow, so what we say then is that matter cycles. Matter cycles. You are made up of stuff that was once something else. And if you think about that for a minute, that makes a lot of sense. If you look at the wall, if you're sitting in your house, you're sitting in the classroom right now, you look at the wall. Where does the stuff that makes up the wall come from? Well, it was once something else. If your house is made of, if you're in a house, or if you look at the cabinets in the classroom, they're made of wood. Where was the wood originally? The wood was actually a tree. What about concrete blocks? What were they originally? Well, they were originally sand and gravel and things like that we've used to build something else. And if this building 200 years from now is destroyed and demolished, what's going to happen to all this stuff? Well, we may burn the cabinets, and the cabinets, all the stuff that's in the cabinets goes into the air. It doesn't go away. So, matter cycles. This is a really important idea. We're going to talk about 3 major cycles that are important to life. The first one you probably already know about is one called the water cycle. The water cycle. I'm going to use some fabulous drawing ability right now to diagram the water cycle. I encourage you to sketch this into your notes or something so that you have the water cycle also. It's a cloud. Cloud. Okay. Water can fall from the sky in many different forms: rain, snow, sleet, hail. We have a word for that: precipitation. That's one way. That's part of the water cycle. Water can go back up into the clouds, fact, that's how clouds are made, is by water being released into the atmosphere. We call that, you probably already know, evaporation. So water falling from the sky, precipitation, water from the ground, evaporation. Now, what about water? What about water that falls from the sky into the ground? What happens to that? Well, some of that water is absorbed by roots. Some of that water runs off into other bodies of water. So maybe it runs off into a river. You know this because when it rains a lot, the creek floods. Why does the creek flood? Well, all the water from the surrounding areas is running off into it. Some of the water gets absorbed into the ground and seeps down and becomes part of this big pool of underground water that we actually use the term groundwater. Groundwater. What about the stuff that gets absorbed by plants? Well, you're like, well, plants use it. They do. But not all of it. And much of that gets released back into the sky from plants, and we'll look at this later in the year. That is called transpiration. Transpiration. Okay? So those are the major parts of the water cycle. Now let's talk about one other thing quickly, which I think is an interesting part of the water cycle. That's your house. Many of you have a well. And so the water you get actually comes, you have this little thing outside, and somebody once upon a time dug a long tube down into the ground that taps into groundwater. And then there's an underground pipe into your house that you turn on a faucet, water is sucked out of the well and pumped out of the well and brought into your house. Okay? Now, what about that? Well, let's think about this a minute. As part of the water cycle, if you have a dog, this is not to scale. Dog. Dog's lifting leg. Your dog may like to urinate on your well. Mark his territory. What happens to the water? That's mostly water. Urine is mostly water. If it wasn't, it'd be kind of chunky, and you would have a hard time letting it out, and so would the dog. So the dog urinates on the well. What happens to that water? Well, if you think about it, if it doesn't get absorbed by the plants around the well, eventually some of that water is going to make its way all the way down through the soil into the groundwater, where it's going to be picked up by your well and pumped back into your house. No, you're thinking that's a really nice thought. My dog urinates on the well, and the well pulls up the water, and I'm drinking dog urine. In a way, why it doesn't taste like dog urine and why they have to dig the wells a certain depth, because actually there's groundwater at different levels, is because ground is actually a natural filter. All the sand and gravel and the dirt is a natural filter, so as the water passes down through the soil, it's filtered. You're like, well, wait a minute, I live in a city. I have, quote, city water. How does that work for me? Well, in a city, In a city, all your houses are connected to two things, a water line and a sewer line. Water line brings water in, sewer brings water out, and other things. So, I'll draw the sewer line as a, should have drawn that as black, probably, but I'll draw it as red. So this one's going out, this one's going in. Where does the water come from? A giant well? No, because then you'd be tapping into groundwater. The greatest source of water here in Michigan, we have this huge source of water called Lake Michigan. And so there's this giant plant on Lake Michigan that pumps in water from Lake Michigan, and it goes through a giant filter and is pumped into the city. And from the city, I don't know how to really draw this. I guess I could draw it like this. Here's Lake Michigan. Here's Coopersville. Here's the plant. There's a giant pipe that actually goes to Coopersville, to Grand Rapids, and other places. There's another one from Holland that goes to Wyoming, Michigan, etc. So we have this giant water inlet. It comes from Lake Michigan, and it's filtered through many series of filters, and you turn on your faucet, and you access that water. What about when I flush my toilet? Where does that go? Well, maybe you've been to the water treatment plant or the sewer plant, where you flush, down it goes, out this long tube, it connects to a giant sewer, runs to a water treatment plant, and some of those water treatment plants, like here in Coopersville, involve sewer ponds, sewage ponds, where all the sewage goes into this giant pond, all the solids sink to the bottom. You can pipe off the stuff on the top. Every once in a while, they dig out all the solid waste, and use it for fertilizer. If you live in the city of Grand Rapids, you don't have sewage ponds necessarily, but a sewer filtering system. And I don't want to get into it any more than that. So that's the water cycle.